Hey everyone, welcome to the NoochieCast, episode 13. My name is Matt Nucci, and welcome to an episode that is going to go a lot differently than I was anticipating this week's episode would go. If you listened to last week's episode, you would know that we were anticipating the PlayStation 5 at this point would be revealed and would be out in the wild, and we'd know everything, we'd be able to talk about it, and we'd have all these discussions about it, trying to figure out what would be happening, what would be, when's it going to come out, what does it look like, what are the games, but that didn't happen, and the reason for that is that more important things got in the way. So, kind of just diving into the news, but all the news is going to be about this. So, if you're unfamiliar, if you're living under a rock, and for some reason this is the only podcast you're listening to, the PlayStation 5 reveal event was pushed back by a week. Now it's going to be on June 11th, which is this coming Thursday. And it was pushed back because of the movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, and the protests, and just everyone forming around the Black Lives Matter movement that was more important at the time. PlayStation just basically sent out their statement saying, we announced that PlayStation 5 was going to be revealed on June 4th, but more important things are happening right now, and we're going to push it back. And you know what? I respect them for it. I just, from my own personal perspective, I'm not anyone, I'm not black. I'm just a white kid from the suburbs of Chicago. I'm just like a dude that, I've not been affected by the black experience because I'm not black, and I cannot step into a black person's shoes and tell you how they're experiencing it. But all I can do myself is listen and speak out and use my platform, on here, but also with people I know, on Twitter, just anywhere that I can speak and just say, I want to help, and I am, pushing forward, trying to push forward as much as I can to say that, yes, Black Lives Matter. This is a topic that doesn't seem, it's gotten so much press, and it has such a movement, but the next step is that it actually starts to reform things. And we're seeing a little bit of that right now. We're seeing like the officers in George Floyd's death have been arrested. There's now the officers in Breonna Taylor's death are being pressured to be arrested. The Minneapolis Police Department has started to, they've announced that they're going to either dissolve their police department or make significant reforms to it. So we're seeing actual reforms take place, and this is something that I'm really passionate about, and I think is a really important thing that even if you can't personally say, I understand what it means to be black in America, because I personally cannot. But even if you can't say that, all you can do is listen and let other people speak. Let the people who know what they're talking about speak. Let these voices be heard, because they've had so much time in the past, historically, where they've never been heard. And now is the time that we need them to be heard. Now more than ever, we need to let them speak. We need to donate, sign petitions, and most importantly, vote. And this isn't even about being political. This isn't a political statement. This is just me saying that we, as a society, have failed the black community, and it's way, 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 way past due for equality and for people in America to not feel like they are discriminated against and to not be discriminated against because of their race, whether it's police brutality or even just in opportunities in life. The black experience in America is wildly different than the white experience in America. And I think that it's really just time that we listen and we push forward and we let voices be heard, and we give our support to them, sign petitions, just keep talking about it, because I will never know what it's like to be black in America, but I can listen, I can let voices be heard, and I can do everything in my power to make sure that we make society a better place for everyone. In gaming, it seems like most of the companies are coming out in support of it. Things like Rockstar came out in support of it to say that they obviously support the Black Lives Matter movement. They shut down GTA Online for a couple of hours. 2K came out. They shut down online for a couple of hours. Call of Duty Warzone did the same thing. So there is a swell behind it in a way that I've never seen before. You know, there have been a lot of, there have been movements in the past that even in the Black Lives Matter movement, there have been times of protest and times of, pushing for reform and change, but nothing like this. And I've never seen anything really to the extent of the worldwide, both personal and even corporate effects that this has had in terms of the money that's being donated, the protests that are happening, and really just the overall mindset. Even if mindsets haven't changed yet, the kind of just mindset awareness that people are making happen. And I think at this point, we just want to keep pushing forward. And I think just having companies come out and say we support the Black Lives Matter movement, that's something. Seeing how they're donating money and really putting efforts into being more diverse and supporting the black community are great initiatives. And I just hope to see that those continue in the future. So anyway, that's pretty much the news on the week. I have another main story on not related to the Black Lives Matter movement, not related to the world, just, more fun. And I will get into that in a bit. But, the news has mostly been it's been all about these protests and the murder of George Floyd. So really, gaming has taken a back seat, rightfully so. The PS5 reveal event is now, as I mentioned, on Thursday, which is great. I'm really excited for that, hoping all is well for that. My predictions stay the same. I'm anticipating a few games, mostly a focus on hardware, that they'll show the console, they'll, run down the specs again, what those specs can do on like these are the features of the console that we're really proud of. And then they're going to go through a bunch of different games that are going to showcase how the hardware works. So I'm expecting something like Horizon 2, maybe Watch Dogs Legion will be there, whatever Blue Point is making, so Demon Souls. I've seen a Bloodborne remake or a remaster, potentially. We'll see. Full predictions are in the last episode, but that's kind of just the general vibe of it. In terms of what I've been playing, really, the only thing I've been playing this week is a game for review that I'm still under embargo for, so I cannot talk about. That review should be coming out on Friday, I believe. But, yeah, I really haven't been playing much else. That's kind of taken up my week, along with the other things that are going on. But yeah, not much else going on right now. I am mostly also just preparing mentally for The Last of Us Part 2 to come out. That's in 9 days. I could not be more fucking excited for that game. I'm still on media blackout. I've done my absolute best to avoid any information whatsoever about it. Some of it has like, I think I'm really good at just taking like literally a noun that I see in the context and being like, fuck, well, that's the ending. Like I see things, I'll see like a name or an idea that is something to do with The Last of Us, and I'll just be like, well, shit, that's like, that's it. That the game's spoiled. But I really don't know what's going to happen. And that's honestly like, a game is only spoiled when you know what's going to happen. Obviously that's the definition of a spoiler, but like, I remember when the first Last of Us came out, and I was just on some like Reddit threads about it, and someone said like, oh, Joel dies at the end of the game. And obviously that's like the most fucking, like, that's the lowest effort spoiler I've ever seen. And it's not true, obviously. But I just remember seeing that and being like, well, shit, game spoiled for me. And then like a couple days later after that, before the game had come out, I was like, well, I actually don't know if Joel dies because I haven't seen it and whatever. So I had that doubt in my head, and that's all it needed to be, to just like get it out of my mind. Because even if I can get the idea of a spoiler and be like, oh, like it might be about this, I could just be like, well, I don't know. Maybe it's just like something kind of throwaway that people mention. So that's kind of just how I wrap my head around it and say, maybe it's not going to happen. And that's where I draw the line at spoilers, because I don't really think it's a spoiler if I have that seed of doubt in my head where I don't think something's going to happen. But yeah, that's all I've really been playing or anticipating. Nothing really much else. So let's move into our main story for the week, which this week, as you probably know, would have been E3. We would have had the EA Play on Saturday, Xbox and Bethesda on Sunday, and then probably Nintendo probably would have been on Tuesday, but Ubisoft, maybe Sony State of Play would have been on Monday, that they would have done like external from the conference. But, this is the week that everything happens. And so I wanted to, because none of that is happening this year and because it's all spread out, I wanted to look back at some E3 press conferences and rank my top 10 E3 press conferences. As I mentioned in the past, E3 press conferences are like my favorite time of the year because it's just like so much hype just fused into an hour and a half of show, and just seeing like game after game after game, and like you didn't know this game existed, and like even if I'm not even going to play that game, like even if there's a game that they reveal that I just have no intention of playing whatsoever, and if I just saw like a tweet or like a news article that's what would have, like, that game was revealed, I wouldn't have cared. But because it was revealed at E3, I'm like, oh my fucking God, this is the hypest moment of my life. So that's why I love E3. And I, in tradition, not even for this segment, just in my tradition that I do every year, because it's just something I really enjoy doing, I went back and started rewatching a bunch of old E3 press conferences. They're great to have on in the background, and they still, honestly, a lot of their hype still holds up surprisingly well, even if you know what happens or you know how good or bad the games turned out. So I wanted to really just look back and see what are my top 10 favorite press conferences of all time. And by that, this is a very subjective list. Obviously, some of this is like I tried to be as objective as possible just because like one game was revealed that I really enjoy, but like isn't particularly hype, then I'm not really going to throw that on the list. But E3 press conferences are as subjective as they get. Adam Boyes famously, that every press conferences wants to have like 3 games for every person watching, and they'll show 20-25 games in a conference. So obviously not everything's going to be for everyone, and there will be more things for certain people than others. But I did just try to make my personal top 10 best E3 press conference list. There is a little bit of hindsight put in here. So if there's a game that I know was canceled or I know turned out really not great, or is still not out for some reason, even if the conference is a few years ago, then it's one of those things that like in hindsight, it's hard to remove yourself from that. But I tried just generally to keep the hype of the moment. So if a conference happened in like 2015, I tried to say how cool was that for that time versus how cool does it look now, knowing what we know. And the criteria here are basically just my overall thoughts on it. So some of them are specific announcements that were made at the conference, whereas some of them are like the overall pacing of it. I think the best conferences are the more like the higher baseline that probably have a few like lower peaks. Like their absolute peak is probably lower than absolute peaks of other conferences, but because their baseline is lower, it's just nonstop throughout, and it's just so much fun to watch. And because of that, the console conferences are pretty clearly the ones that are going to be the best overall conferences, just by the fact that they have a wider range of games to portray. They have to show their exclusives, of course, but they also have to show the third parties that they're in partnerships with, and they have to show the indies, whereas a company like EA, which, spoilers, is not on the list anywhere, they're only showing their own games. So they're going to be showing Madden and FIFA every year, and then they'll show like a Battlefield and a Star Wars and whatever when it comes out, but they're really not going to be pushing any boundaries with their conference, and they have things that they have to show. So you'll notice that this list is almost exclusively console conferences. And I also want to mention that I only did in-person conferences, so Nintendo Directs are not included. And neither is like a state of play. And I also, this is going to be my personal favorites, as I mentioned. So, being someone who really didn't start getting into E3 conferences until like 2012, 2013, this is going to be there's going to be a lot of recency bias here. But with as much experience as I have on E3 conferences, I still do think these are the best conferences regardless. Maybe like Nintendo when they revealed Twilight Princess and Miyamoto came out on stage. Like that's a really cool moment. But I do think these are the 10 best conferences I've ever seen. And I think, just it's very console heavy. And I think we should get into it. So at number 10, I want to say the PlayStation press conference in 2014. So Sony's 2014 press conference, first year that the PlayStation 4 is on the market, first full year that it will have been on the market, and they open it. They came off a an incredible first few months. And they open it with Destiny, this game that they've been touting forever. And then they go into a game like The Order, where they're revealing this new IP that actually this wasn't the reveal, but they're showing it. And they're really, it's an interesting time for PlayStation, because they're in this limbo where they don't have a lot of first party games coming out soon. The Order is an exclusive that ended up coming out in 2015. And they end up showing Infamous First Light and Little Big Planet 3, and Bloodborne right after that, actually. All of those ended up coming out, and Bloodborne was obviously really good. But it seemed like it was kind of a lackluster year in terms of, like, they don't really have these hard-hitting first-party exclusives. And it's kind of a weird conference. Like, they go into The Order, and they go into Little Big Planet, and they go into Bloodborne, and then it kind of hits a lull. They show Dead Island 2, which is still in development hell. I think it's still being developed by Jaeger, but it's, like, weird. And then they show, like, Battlefield Hardline and a bunch of indies and things like that. And then they go into, like, a weird TV moment where they talk about Powers, this PlayStation Plus show that only had one season. It might have only had one episode, honestly. And then they talk about Ratchet and Clank, the movie, and the game that they, like, slyly announce at the end. The reason it's on the list is the last, like, 10 minutes or 15 minutes of the conference. Everything before that is fine, but it's not, like, groundbreaking. But at the end of it, right after Ratchet and Clank, Andrew House is on stage, and he goes rapid fire. He goes, The Last of Us Remastered, Metal Gear Solid 5, GTA 5, Batman Arkham Knight, and Uncharted 4. Just, like, back to back to back to back to back, 5 games. They're all amazing. Just incredible trailers. I still go back and I will literally skip the entire conference until that, and I'll just watch Last of Us trailer, Metal Gear trailer, GTA trailer, Batman, Uncharted, and it's just such a great run at the end of it. And I love the end of that conference. Even if it was at a weird time and it was like a weird conference in the games they showed, I think the, like, ending with those 5 games, even if 2 of them are PS3 games that are coming to PS4, it's such a great ending. And they were all such good trailers too. The GTA 5 trailer, it was so cool. Such good music. The Metal Gear Solid 5 trailer, I haven't even played Metal Gear Solid 5, and I know that trailer front to back because I love it. Music, directing, everything. And then obviously Uncharted 4. Number 9 on the list is Sony's press conference in 2018. This was Sony's most recent press conference, and I really, really debated not having this on the list because my initial impressions of this conference is that I didn't like it. I remember watching it as it happened. I was so confused. If you remember, this was the conference where they had the group of people in one staging area, and they would show a trailer, and then they would move them to another area and show another trailer. And in between, they'd have an intermission where they'd show some snippets of other things. So they start with The Last of Us Part 2. They have Gustavo Santaolalla. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm probably butchering it. The composer for The Last of Us playing the music, and then it goes into this just absurd trailer that I didn't rewatch because I'm on blackout. But and it's this really long trailer, and then they stop it, and lights come up, and all the audience moves, and they go to the desk with, like, Sid Schumann and Ryan Clements, and they talk about Call of Duty and Destiny, and then they move into the next room and talk about Ghost of Tsushima, and then they reveal Control and Resident Evil 2, and then they move on to Death Stranding. And the more I think about it, the more I think this conference was just so structurally weird that it kind of dampened the actual quality of the conference itself. Because you look at, it's a really quality over quantity kind of conference, because you see The Last of Us, you see Ghost, Control, and Resident Evil 2 are just all slam dunks. And then they go Kingdom Hearts 3, Death Stranding, and then Nioh and Spider-Man. And it's just every game here was just hit. Now, obviously, The Last of Us and Ghost of Tsushima are not out yet, but I'm going to assume that they're probably going to be good, hopefully. So, yeah, I think this is probably the most out there conference on here because it's it was so weird. It wasn't a traditional E3 conference. It was really just like, we're PlayStation, we're going to do something different for The Last of Us and for the 4 games that they were really highlighting. But the fact that they also revealed Control, which was such a good game, and Resident Evil 2 there in such a cool way is just a really kind of a testament to how like sneaky good this conference was. It's in terms of the list, I definitely could have made it a top 8 list because I think the top 8 are significantly better than those last 2. And I honestly could have segmented it into top 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 9, 10. So we've been through 9 and 10. And now we're going to move into like the next tier, I would say, of conferences, starting with number 8, which is the only non-conference or non-console conference on this list. So I guess spoilers for the rest of it. But at number 8, we have the press conference from 2015 from Bethesda. So this might come off as a little weird because this conference was so focused on games. As I mentioned, having just a publisher conference, they don't have that much to say because they don't have the wide range of games that they can announce. But I think Bethesda here showed precisely what a publisher conference needs to be. This was their first press conference ever. They had never done an E3 conference before this, and they've been doing them ever since. And everyone knew what was coming. Everyone knew why they were doing this conference because 2 weeks earlier, following a lot of leaks and a lot of rumors, Fallout 4 was announced. And Fallout 4 was just probably the biggest game of the year. Everyone was excited for it. And Bethesda's like, all right, we're gonna do a big blowout on Fallout 4. But we get into the conference and it starts, and you start with a reboot of Doom, which looks fucking awesome in the conference, and then turns out to be incredible. And then you also get, among a couple other things like Elder Scrolls Online and Elder Scrolls Legends, you get Dishonored 2, which is also a big game. And then you go into Fallout 4, which this is like, it's a half hour of the conference, a little more than that, where Todd Howard is just out there just working the crowd. Like he's a star. He's a stand-up comedian. And he's just showing off Fallout 4, like, this is what the game is. Here's the gameplay. Here's all the new features. Here's what you can do, like in crafting and in building. Here's Fallout Shelter. Here's this, like, the Pip-Boy that you can wear in the special edition. It's amazing. Like, it's probably one of the best long demos that I've ever seen in terms of, like, just explaining the game in such a, not even in, it wasn't, like, concise because it was more than half an hour, but it was such a gripping way to do it. Like, it's 30 something minutes long, but it doesn't feel like that. Like, I will watch it and I'm like, oh my God, I just watched that entire thing and it felt like 5 minutes, but it was half an hour. And I think that Bethesda really showed up there because they knew they just had all these cards up their sleeve with Doom and Dishonored and Fallout, and they're just like, well, I guess we're just going to do a conference. And since then, their conferences have been, like, fine. I considered putting their 2019 list up here, which had the reveal of Ghostwire Tokyo, Deathloop, Doom Eternal. But I felt that was, like, a little weird with the Fallout 76 controversies. But yeah, I think that's the best publisher conference I've seen, top to bottom, in terms of like just going throughout. This is what I want a publisher conference to be. Next is the most recent conference on this list. That would be the 2019 conference from Xbox. And so the reason that this conference is where it is, Xbox has had just an absolute killing it streak of conferences. Honestly, since the Xbox One launched, all their conferences have just been top notch. And this one felt different because this was the first year that Sony wasn't there, and it felt like the pressure was on for Xbox to be like, hey, this is Xbox. This is why you need to buy an Xbox, because like we have the floor. Sony's not after us. Like Sony's not later tonight or tomorrow showing their stuff. Like they're doing their own thing. We are going to take the stage. And they did like an objectively good conference. Like all the games there are great. They start out with all their Xbox Game Studios games: Outer Worlds, Bleeding Edge, Ori, Minecraft Dungeons. They this is the conference where Cyberpunk had Keanu Reeves and he came out. They talk about Flight Simulator. They announced the acquisition of Double Fine. They talk about like Borderlands 3, announce Elden Ring, and then talk about Project Scarlet and Halo. But so like objectively it's a good conference. It felt a little lackluster, which is why it's so low on the list, because it didn't feel like it had that punch. It felt like this is the culmination of Xbox, like a generation long of improving their E3 conferences and making it just like more and more games. And I think they still delivered. It was still a great conference. It was a little ruined by leaks. Something like Elden Ring was leaked beforehand, which sucks because that would have been such a cool reveal if we didn't know about it. But otherwise, I think it was a good conference, like an objectively just like, good conference, but it didn't push any boundaries, which is why it's kind of in this like tier 2, and only at number 7. And similarly, at number 6, we have Xbox's conference in 2015. This one is, I think, for me at least, known for one specific moment, which is the moment where Phil Spencer announces Xbox One backwards compatibility, which I still hold as probably the single moment of E3, especially this generation, since 2014. Because it was just such a, everyone had been complaining about backwards compatibility not being a thing on these consoles, and all the buildup of all these features being added to Xbox, and Spencer just on the stage in the middle being like, oh, what's he going to announce? And then he's like, we did it. I think that was such a cool way to do it. This is also later in the conference. They do the HoloLens demo where they're showing Minecraft on this is what Minecraft could look like on your kitchen table, wearing the HoloLens, which I thought was, I still think is a really, really fucking cool thing to do. It's 5 years later and I haven't heard anything from HoloLens. I'm not sure if it's honestly still in development, but I thought those were two standout moments from this. And then the rest of it is kind of like the 2019 conference where it's, front to back. It's really solid. There's Halo, there's Forza, there's just a bunch of games that you would want to be there. There's Gears that ended it, but it was nothing that was really hard hitting that I really felt was this is what makes a conference great. So other than those couple of moments, it was a little bit of a lower baseline with those higher peaks. Whereas we're about to get into the top 5, which is going to be the really highest tier of conferences where that's where I felt like it's a really high baseline and then it gets like really high peaks. And on that, so we're on the top 5 now, where these are the conferences, like I mentioned, just front to back, awesome. They're just so, they're like pacing wise so good. They're not like really letting you down at any point, but they also have those really incredible, surprising, just hype moments. And I cannot think of a moment of a conference that has more just straight up hype moments than the number 5 entry on this list, which would be Sony's press conference in 2015. This conference, I did kind of struggle on where I wanted to put this because I didn't know how much the reveals from it brought it up. This is the conference where they reveal The Last Guardian again for the first time in like 8 years. They reveal it and they start with it. They open with The Last Guardian, and everyone's been asking about this game for almost a decade. And they're like, you know what? Fuck you. It's here. And then later on, they reveal Horizon. They reveal Hitman, Street Fighter. And then they move on, do some other things. And then, they're just talking, and they're like, oh, bam, fucking Final Fantasy VII Remake. And right, like, bam, bam, Shenmue 3. It's like the trifecta of the three games that have been asked for like decades or like a decade or more. These games have been questioned and thought about, and I think that this conference, with those three moments, bring up like the average hype of this conference so much, because there's an Uncharted 4 demo, there's a Battlefront demo, there's an Arkham Knight demo. Those are all great, but those 3, Last Guardian, Final Fantasy VII, Shenmue 3, even though the fact that Shenmue 3 was only a Kickstarter, just the fact that they brought it out on stage just made it such a cool moment. But of these like top tier things, I think that the rest of the conference was a little, just a little, like just below the notches of the other conferences, in terms of overall just constant success. That those specific announcements were great, but not quite as good as these other 4. And number 4, I would like to say, is the Xbox conference from 2017. So this was one where there aren't really any incredible moments here. There's nothing here where I'm just like, oh my God, holy shit, that I cannot wait like for that. Something like a Final Fantasy VII or a Last Guardian. But this is the one where it's like the pacing is just like back to back games. Everything that needed to be shown was shown. There was no overblown, bloated demos. It starts Xbox One X. Here's the name. Here's what it does. Here's the power. Here's the specs. Here's the here's the games. And then it goes into Forza, and then it's a reveal of Metro, and then it's kind of like a quote unquote reveal of Assassin's Creed Origins. You talk about Sea of Thieves. You talk about Cuphead. You reveal Crackdown again, Ori, and then you go into another backwards compatibility with the original Xbox. Then you go into the price of the Xbox One X, and then you do Anthem. It's just all of those things back to back to back. Like, it feels like there's no stopping. Even though it's an hour and a half conference, it feels like nothing is going to slow it down, and it's over in a second. That's just how I feel when I watch this conference. It's so much fun. It just to see all these games in such quick succession. This is Xbox almost at the top of their game in terms of like this is why you need an Xbox. This is the ecosystem. This is our messaging. The Xbox One X, the most powerful console. Here's Metro, here's Forza, here's Ori, here's Anthem, and here's original Xbox backwards compatibility. We know no one's going to use it, but like you asked for it, so we made it happen. And I just really enjoy that conference because of that. Next on the list is probably one that has the single most iconic E3 moment of all time. And that would be Sony's conference from E3 2013. This one honestly doesn't even need an introduction. This is one where, again, there are a couple moments that just bring it just like over the top in terms of how good it is. But also, the games they show here are nothing to be scoffed at. They still have to talk about the PS3, so they start with like The Last of Us, a couple of PS3 games. Other than that, like Beyond, Gran Turismo, Batman, Arkham Origins was still coming out. And then they quickly turn and go into the PS4, and they talk about they show the hardware, which is really good, and then they show a bunch of first-party games, and it's like, here is why you need a PS4. Like, game, fuck you, PS4. So they show The Order. They show all the games that they revealed at the PS4 reveal event, so Killzone, Drive Club, Knack, and Infamous. They show The Witness. And then they have that like big little, just stage setup where they have 8 indie games and they just, walk through them. And then they reveal Final Fantasy 15 and Kingdom Hearts 3 back to back. Like, the Kingdom Hearts 3 is probably on the level of like Shenmue 3 or The Last Guardian in terms of how much it's been asked for. Maybe even Final Fantasy 7, to be honest. That was such a huge moment. And then they go into Assassin's Creed 4 and Watch Dogs, which are both launch titles. They talk about Mad Max, and then you get to Jack Tretton just being like dick on the table, fuck you, Xbox, where he comes out and he's like, you know what? We don't have any restrictions on used games. We don't have anything where you need to be online. Here's what everything PS Plus can do. And it's basically just like the biggest reaction I've ever seen of anything, where the PlayStation is basically just being like, you know what? Fuck you, Xbox, we win. And then they go into Destiny, which is like, fine. And then they reveal the price, where it's $399 on the PS4 compared to the $499 that was revealed earlier that day for the Xbox One. This is one where it's like the conference is held up just by the facts of the console, like the PS4 not being online, not being always online, allowing used games, and being $399. Like, that would have just made it an amazing conference regardless of, they could have shown just like a paint drying for an hour and a half, and also that there wasn't any used games and that it was $399, and they would have been like, PlayStation wins. But then they also show all these like new IPs, Final Fantasy, Kingdom Hearts, Watch Dogs, AC4, Mad, like it was such a good conference. It's still one that gives me chills when I watch it, because that moment of Jack Tretton talking is one of the most just epic moments of E3 of all time. But that does not fit into the top two. Now, the top two, I had trouble ranking these. Like, if number one is a 10, honestly, no. Both of these are probably 10s in my book for conferences. They are both just like masterclasses in pacing, in games shown, in like announcements themselves, just flat announcements. They're just so epic constantly. There's no lulls in them. They just do everything they want to do perfectly. And I had a really hard time ranking these two because I didn't know which one I wanted on top. And I ultimately decided that my number one would be the one that I felt was more efficient in the time, which basically means it was the shorter one. But with that, number 2 on this list is the Xbox press conference in 2018. Xbox came this year after 2017 was just, like I mentioned earlier, just a masterclass. They'd come out and, here's the Xbox One X, it's doing so well. And then in 2018, they just dick on the table, Halo Infinite, first thing they show. And then they go into Ori and Sekiro, which we didn't know about, or at least I don't remember knowing about it. But then you just keep looking at these games. They have Crackdown, Nier, Metro, Kingdom Hearts 3 made its appearance on the stage for the first time. And they're just talking about all these games that are all great. Battlefield, Forza. But the thing that really makes this conference stand out to me is a little bit like the 2013 one, where it's just this information would make it a great conference regardless. But this is the conference where Xbox announces that they've acquired 5 new studios, where they announced The Initiative, Playground, Undead Labs, Ninja Theory, and Compulsion. And then they go into some of the games from that. And I think that was a moment in my head where I'm like, oh shit, the game has changed. The game, this shit it's a new ball game here. They acquired Ninja Theory. They've got Hellblade on their side now. Even though I don't love Hellblade, that's a huge game. That's a huge studio. They've got Playground making probably what's a new Fable game. And then after that, they go in and they just have another fucking incredible ending, where the last 25 minutes of this conference are unbelievable. They have a demo of Shadow of the Tomb Raider, but after that they go Session, which everyone thought was Skate 4, Devil May Cry 5, Jump Force, which I know didn't turn out great, but was awesome at the time. Dying Light 2 Reveal, which that looks awesome. I didn't play Dying Light 1, and that demo made me want Dying Light 2 day and date. Hopefully it comes out of development hell at some point, because I would like to play it. Battletoads Reveal, a reboot, which is awesome. Still not out yet, but awesome. Just Cause 4, Gears 5, and that's the last 25 minutes of it, minus a couple minutes. And Phil Spencer comes out on stage, and I'm even at that point, I'm oh my God, this is one of the best conferences I've ever seen. Because like I mentioned, it's just pacing. It's just game after game after game. And, obviously pacing doesn't mean it has to be 100 miles an hour all the time. Part of pacing is those a little bit slower moments, or lulls where you're talking about a Sea of Thieves, you're talking about a PUBG or indie games, or Game Pass or things like that. But it felt so perfectly paced that I was never tired of it. I was never exhausted, but I was never bored. Which just, it made me, it reinvigorated the love for E3. And that's what I'm thinking when Phil Spencer's talking. And then Cyberpunk hacks it. And the Cyberpunk hack, is probably the best ending to any E3 press conference I've ever seen, where it's basically them saying, oh, and one more thing, but without having to say it, because they're just Phil Spencer's just thanks, and then it just goes red, and everything just becomes Cyberpunk. And it's such a great moment, and it's followed by an amazing trailer. It's a game we know is going to be great, but it's just followed by this awesome trailer. If you remember that the little pre-trailer code screen has all these codes for The Witcher 3. It's just awesome. This conference, man, it was really tough not putting this at number 1, because I think personally, in terms of just sheer hype, this is probably the one that would be number 1 for me. But my actual number one is the one that I think is like the more technically great game that is also just like, it's absurdly hyped for me too. Don't get me wrong. But in terms of just like, this is how a press conference is done. This 2018 Xbox One is great. But I think my number one is like just a tinge better. And of course, that conference would be Sony's press conference in 2016. Aside from one small misstep, there is a very, very small, like, anything that I could see being wrong with this conference. Like, this is a 10 through and through. It's like, you start with 5 minutes of just God of War music playing. And you, like, at the time, we didn't know what was going on. They hadn't revealed God of War yet. And we were just like, what the fuck is happening? But, like, I'm so intrigued. Like, this is awesome. And then they show God of War, and it's this fucking incredible demo of God of War. And then they go 6 straight games of not necessarily reveals, but of just big, huge games that are either exclusive or like have exclusive content on PlayStation. The first 5 is just like, it almost feels like Sony is blowing their load on this conference. They're just like, fucking, you know what? Whatever. Show them all. Show them everything. Here's a portfolio of everything. Because they go God of War, Days Gone, which was a reveal at that point, Last Guardian, which I mentioned was revealed the year before, but was given a date for that year, Horizon, and Detroit. That's 5 first-party games back to back to back to back to back to start the conference, to fucking open it. And it's in like 25 minutes, and they're just like, you know what? Here's fucking everything. And then they do Resident Evil 7, a reveal that, like, we didn't know what it was. And it's an awesome trailer for what ended up being an awesome game. And then that moves into some PSVR stuff. That's such a great transition, because they're like, Resident Evil 7 is fully playable on PSVR. They have a little bit of a lull in some of the PSVR stuff, but it doesn't mean it's not cool, because they're talking about it. They're saying, like, VR is coming out in October. Here's the price. Here's a bunch of games. They talk about Call of Duty a little bit, and then they bring out Kojima, and they're like, you know what? That portfolio was enough. Fuck you. Here's Death Stranding for like nothing. And then after that, fuck you again. Here's Spider-Man. Like, this game, it literally does not miss. It's batting 1,000 on the games that it shows, being just unbelievable. I just want to run through this again. God of War, Days Gone, Last Guardian, Horizon, Detroit, Resident Evil 7, PSVR, Call of Duty, Death Stranding, Spider-Man. That is like the single greatest lineup of games in a single conference that I've ever seen. Like, bar none. The pacing is unbelievable. And it, like, I could not stop watching it. Just go back to it. They fit this in an hour. They show all these games, and they're just like, basically, you know what? Fuck you. We're PlayStation. We're the greatest first-party studio collection around. Here's why. And, like, I'm just baffled. Like, it just didn't make sense. The misstep that I mentioned is the fact that they ended with Days Gone again, which I thought was a really weird ending. So it was like, here's 55 minutes of this just being a perfect, like a literally almost perfect conference. And then it being like, it ends on like a 7 instead of a 10, but that still makes it like the average would be like a 99 instead of 100, you know? So it's still absolutely a 10 in my book. Kind of a weird ending, but everything before that just absolutely holds it up and makes it the single best conference I've ever seen. Though that 2018 Xbox conference does absolutely give it a run for its money. It's like a photo finish where the the 2016 Sony one is like, it's nose, it's out. Maybe it's like a little hard, and it's like its PP is the ender. But yeah, they're really close. I do want to give a couple shout outs to some conferences that I didn't mention. Ones that missed the cut: 2016 Xbox, kind of like Sony's in 2014, which was number 10. Just like good conference, didn't really like blow me away at any point. It was the conference of revealing Scorpio, which ended up being the Xbox One X. Them being of Kareem Chowdhury being like, it's a monster, which was great. Like, that's just an awesome moment. But nothing else in that really hit me. Same thing with Xbox 2014. Like I mentioned, a little bit of hindsight was in this, and just knowing that like Phantom Dust and Scalebound were in that conference. It felt a little weird. It was like kind of the transition year between Don Matrick and Phil Spencer. A couple of cool moments there, but I didn't hate it, or I didn't love it. I mean, Sony's 2010 conference, the farthest back that I would have reached, because this is the one of Gabe Newell coming out and saying, here's Portal 2 on PS3, and them coming out and showing Twisted Metal and Infamous 2, and there's the famous moment of Kevin Butler coming on stage and talking about PlayStation Move, but like talking about gamers and being like, we are gamers, we are one, we are like awesome. That was a cool moment. That it had like 25 minutes of Move demos, and I just couldn't justify that being on the list. But I did like those moments are really cool. I just closed the Word document. We're back. But and Ubisoft 2012's conference. This conference, it was probably the last or second to last cut. I cut it because there was a bunch of Wii U stuff that I didn't really care about, and it had like a 10-minute Shootmania Storm thing where they had like an actual on-stage demo of like a physical game that I still don't really understand. But it had a Far Cry 3 demo, a Splinter Cell demo, a Rayman Legends demo, and it was the initial reveal of Watch Dogs, which I remember that Watch Dogs demo coming out and it being one of the single greatest demos I'd ever seen. Still is, in terms of like the amount of hype that it raised. It was just awesome. But yeah, I couldn't put it on there with those like little weird tangents in the middle. Also shout out to Ubisoft's 2011 conference, which didn't have all that many like incredible moments, but that Far Cry 3 demo in 2011 was probably the single best demo I've seen. So yeah. And then just to shout out the bad conferences, Sony's 2012 conference, this was the Wonder Book year. I'm just thinking back to that conference. I know there were others, but I can literally only think of 2 games in that, because it feels like it's like, or no, 3 games. Sorry. They open with Beyond Two Souls, and then they do Wonder Book. And like, I know there's a PlayStation All-Stars demo in there, but it doesn't feel like it's there. And then in my mind, it just goes straight to God of War Ascension and The Last of Us. And like, that's the conference. I know it's an hour and a half, and I know there are things that happened, but like, that's all there is in there. And it's the jump between Sony's 2012 conference and 2013 conference is unbelievable. Also Xbox's 2013 conference, and honestly most of them before that, but 2013 specifically, where I actually don't hate it as much as other people, but this is, they're following the reveal event that happened like a couple months before this, and they're just like, here's a bunch of games that, are fine. It's like, I don't know, Titanfall was the big one, but they had like Dead Rising 3 and talking about like Smart Glass, and it was just in such a dismal time for the Xbox brand that it was just caught in the wake of the absolutely abysmal reveal event for the Xbox One. So this conference itself wasn't absolutely terrible, but it wasn't great. Ubisoft's 2016 conference, most of the Ubisoft conferences since 2013 or 2012 have been like, meh, like fine. But the 2016 conference was one that lasted 2 fucking hours. And they like sat down with everyone. They sat down with Michael Fassbender, I think, or someone from the Assassin's Creed movie to show a behind the scenes thing of the movie. And I'm just like, fuck off. Like, I want to watch games. They sat down with so many developers, and I just like do this in a post show, do this in like a YouTube video or something. I don't need it to be on stage. Even though the games they showed were like not terrible, I was just like, ugh, I can't. And lastly, Sony's 2017 conference. I believe that was the first video I ever put on this channel, was why Sony disappointed at E3 2017. And I think it was honestly because of because of their 2016 conference that they couldn't perform at 2017, because they just, like I said, they blew their load at 2016. They were like, here's every fucking game we own. 2017, so they reveal like the Uncharted Lost Legacy and Horizon Frozen Wilds, but other than that, literally the only reveals I see on here are Shadow of the Colossus and Monster Hunter World, which I'm sure wasn't the reveal of it. I'm sure that was just like a trailer. So like there weren't really any reveals, and it was kind of disappointing. Honestly, the video that I made, still good. You could go watch it to see why that didn't make the list. But that's my top 10 list of my top 10 best E3 conferences of all time. Yeah, I love E3, and I'm really sad it's not happening, but we are coming up in a period of gaming that is going to be super interesting. Not only do we have the PS5 reveal conference on Thursday, we have EA Play on next Thursday, I believe, the 18th. And then obviously we have Xbox's event in July. We have Ubisoft's event in July. Just a lot of like minor events coming up. Cyberpunk's doing a thing. PC gaming shows coming up soon. It's going to be really interesting, and I'm really excited. But once those happen, I will obviously be doing all of my in-depth analysis of the shows and what they showed and what they didn't show, and why they were good or not good. So, yeah, I'm really excited. I just would hope you are too. But until then, I would like to thank you for listening. As I mentioned, this is Matt B. Nucci, and you've been listening to the NoochieCast. And I'll see you next time.